A crazy dark villain, some maybe unintentional moral complexity, and a pretty biblical concept of love. All that and more. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, in each installment, there's my script. I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan, and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about. That's your first and only warning. Right now, we're taking a look at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on January 8th, 2025, originally published December 11th, 2024. First from that group, Superwoman Special, number 1, part of the DC's All-In initiative. This finally presents a more fully fleshed out origin story for Lois Lane's Kryptonian superpowers and how that came about, what that was like for her to discover them, to test them out, what she was thinking and feeling as she's suddenly stepping into this world that her husband has known for so long, how she feels about the possibility of eventually losing her powers, which I think is a good thing to foreshadow, because I think longtime comic readers know freaking Lois Lane is not going to have Superman powers forever. That's just, it's cool as a device for her, I don't know, a period of time, but we all know eventually they've got to kind of reset her to more of what is expected. But I love this opportunity for her to experience more of her husband's perspective and for them to have a connection on that point. But the big reveal that was really interesting to me was that and they explain how this happened in the comics. The mystery of like, okay, well, Superman's powers don't seem to be reduced at all, and the way that all these people got these powers after the big absolute power event was from power swapping or power stealing. Somebody lost their powers, someone else gained that same set of powers. But there's no Kryptonians on Earth that have had any of their powers drained. So where did these powers come from? At the very end, they reveal that somewhere off in space, because of things that made it possible, she stole her powers from Zod. And this special basically sets up at the end that, like, this is the beginning of an arc that we are starting into here. And I am all on board for that. So very cool to read Superwoman Special number 1. Next up, Batman Dark Patterns number 1. Or actually, let's see, it says on the top Batman Dark Patterns, but then at the bottom it says We Are the Wounded Part 1. So I'm unclear, is this a new ongoing series called Batman Dark Patterns and the first story is called We Are the Wounded Part 1? Anyway, I would be on board for that based on the first issue. This seems to be taking place in the first few years of Bruce Wayne's kind of career as Batman and is taking inspiration aesthetically from the Tim Burton Batman movie, both a little bit in the logo on Batman's chest. Also, the Batmobile seems very much taken from those films. But apart from that, it has some year one vibes in being more grounded, more gritty. It's more of a detective story as he's tracking down a serial killer, trying to make sense of it. But like the big confrontation, his first confrontation with this killer is absolutely fascinating. It's like a brilliant concept for a new villain that I hope is around for a long time in Batman's rogues gallery. We find out at the end of the issue that this guy, his concept or his name probably is the Wounded Man, taken from, I don't know if this is real or fictitious, but in the story there's this 14th century medieval manuscript, medical manuscript that Batman is aware of because of his dad's being a physician. That showed like this diagram of a person who has all these weapons and stuff inserted into them. And I'm not sure exactly what the concept is. Maybe that'll be fleshed out more in the next issue. But this guy has nails, and well, it looks like tacks based on how deep they are in there. But Batman says they're nails, and he's got metal spikes, and he's got like freaking rebar that is shoved into his body all over the place, and in many cases coming out the other side. And yet this guy is walking around and like doing more than that. He's fighting Batman, and Batman, his instinct is of course take this guy down. He doesn't have any kind of a great fighter stance. He doesn't have any kind of ability as a fighter. But Batman realizes, oh my gosh, I can't even punch this guy. If I punch this guy, he's got all of these things positioned, Batman can tell, so that if he punches and drives any of them in further, they will hit something vital. They'll hit an artery, they'll hit his heart, they'll hit his windpipe, all these kinds of things. So he can't touch this guy. And so for their first encounter, he's kind of frozen a bit and ends up just taking a bunch of like sucker punch blows from this unknown person that normally Batman wouldn't take at all. But like, I think he's even hesitant in some ways to block him. I mean, because Batman won't kill, and he realizes all of his normal techniques will kill this dude instantly, and yet he's a serial killer. It's such a great dilemma. I love this concept as a villain. I really hope this isn't a one and done concept. Instantly, I'm like, this guy is worthy of being right up there with at least like Scarecrow and Penguin, and have a strong place in his rogues gallery. Maybe even someday he'll be named along with the likes of Two-Face and Joker. I don't know, but this concept is so diabolically creepy and brilliant. So I can't wait to see more of the Wounded Man and how Batman is going to deal with this very, very interesting villain. Next up, we've got Black Lightning #2, and I really enjoyed the first issue because it seemed to be leaning into some family relational dynamics, and it certainly is continuing in that vein this time around. So already in the first 3 pages, I was like, this is great. I'm really liking this. Then it does take an interesting turn into some philosophical or maybe some political commentary of some kind. Let me jump to it. Okay, so there's a man giving a speech at some kind of rally. Can't remember what his job, his role is. Maybe if he's in government or running from government, I can't remember. But anyway, he's saying at this speech, Amanda Waller was a patriot. And of course, Amanda Waller was the villain of the Absolute Power storyline, where she was like, metahumans are dangerous. We need to lock them up, get them under control, that kind of stuff. So kind of like an X-Men type of vibe, where she's like down with mutants, that kind of thing. But it's metahumans in the DC universe instead. He says Amanda Waller was a patriot. She had the courage to stand up to these heroes, quote unquote, and even though they locked her away, one thing is clearer than ever before: Amanda Waller was right. And there's a whole movement, people with picket signs saying Waller was right, that kind of thing. So there's a very strong kind of divide on this issue being expressed in the public square. He says these metahumans are not like the rest of us. They simply are not. Most of them are incredibly dangerous to any and every person around them, and admitting that incontrovertible fact does not make one a bad person. It doesn't make you prejudiced or intolerant in any way. It makes you awake. It means you can still believe your own eyes without social media telling you what is real and what is true. This truth cost Amanda Waller her freedom, but her example and her inspiration live on. We need to get full control of this situation before it's too late, if it isn't already. Now, the language he is using sounds familiar. We just came through a tumultuous election for the presidency in the United States, and some of these little beats sound kind of they have parallels to things that we as Americans were kind of wrestling with and thinking about. The idea that, recognizing some certain statement as true doesn't make you prejudiced or intolerant in any way would put this the kinds of things that this guy is saying parallel to some of the kinds of things we would hear said on the right side of the political spectrum. Then kind of like a gray statement that straddles the middle probably. He says it means you can still believe your own eyes without social media telling you what is real and what is true. So somebody basically saying, don't believe social media. Well, there's been times in the last few years where we've heard that from both the left and the right. So I don't think that particularly leans in one direction over the other. But this guy is clearly being portrayed as like a villain, someone that probably is prejudiced or intolerant in some way. And yet, in this particular instance, I can sympathize with his concern when he says these metahumans are not like the rest of us. They simply are not. Okay, that's true. That doesn't mean they're inhuman. Doesn't mean they're not worthy of dignity and respect and love, but they can shoot lasers out of their eyes whenever they want in some cases. So, he says most of them are incredibly dangerous to any and every person around them. Well, it depends on what he means by that. Potentially dangerous? Are they actually doing things that are harming others? But even so, I can relate to at least the complexity of this situation. That He seems like he's being painted as a villain, and yet I'm like, hey, these are at least reasonable things to be considering and concerned about. Like, how are we going to live in a society safely where someone, down the street could shoot lasers out of their eyes tomorrow, and we would never see it coming? Then this is where it gets kind of interesting. The guy at the podium says, "Does that answer your question, Mr. Troop?" And for those who don't know, there's a character named Ronald Troop that's been a mainstay of the Daily Planet for many years. He's a reporter there. So this is evidently in response to some kind of a question from a journalist. Troop follows up. He says, "A follow-up if you have time, Councilman Harriman." So, Councilman Harriman. So he's a councilman. "Does this position on the larger metahuman community reflect your feelings on the newly expanded Justice League, or is it only limited to the unfortunate victims of the recent power surge phenomenon recently affecting our city?" So the power surge being the event that caused all these people to suddenly gain superpowers. The councilman responds saying, "Victims? I think some would dispute that particular word choice, Mr. Troop." Okay, so we could have a discussion about that. We're also cutting to a young teenage boy, I think, who is watching this news coverage and is very concerned about this. We find out later that he himself has gained metahuman powers and is trying to keep them under control. Well, the next thing we hear is a response from Troop saying, "I believe that accurately describes the situation. None of these people are at all responsible for their powers and abilities they've been infected with." So this is Troop. This is a journalist who is being very upfront with taking a position on this issue. And the reason I think that's interesting is because we've seen the mainstream news media accused of, and I think in a number of cases rightly accused of, political bias. I think that accusation has been levied lately. I've heard it more against the left, but I think you can find it in the right as well. But I think we've just heard it more of an accusation thrown at the left lately. So that's interesting because that would put Ronald Troop, a character we're normally supposed to like, having things in common with a media that has been very criticized lately. So I'm puzzling through this. I'm trying to figure out, what am I supposed to take away from this? Is this supposed to appeal to the left-leaning reader, the right-leaning reader? I think, statistically speaking, most creatives working in industry have tended to lean left, although we may be seeing a shift in that. So this writer really has me guessing, is like, okay, what do you want me to be thinking and feeling? And I actually like that. I like that I don't definitively and overtly feel like I'm being preached to. I'm being given something that's complex that I need to try and sort through and figure out. Even if there is some kind of agenda on the part of the writer, if there's enough complexity in it that leaves room for me to kind of sort through things and have my own opinion on, without feeling like I have to accept the view of the writer in order to buy into who the heroes and villains are, then I'm very content with that and actually find that very engaging material to read. And Troop goes on after the councilman responds, with something else like, disagreement with Troop. Well, Troop comes right back again, taking a side on the issue, saying many of these victims are your own constituents, Councilman. I would expect a little more compassion, and then he gets cut off. So I am not so dialed into Superman comics that I have a real good sense of Ronald Troop as a character, but it is interesting here that he, as a journalist, is very clearly not just asking questions to get information, to write a story, to use to write a story later, but has already taken a side in this issue and is kind of becoming combative with the person that he is interviewing or asking questions of. Well, Isaac's mom comes in, sees him watching this. It is concerned that it's maybe upsetting him, and he's like, "Listen, you need to trust the people that have been trying to help you with this. You met Black Lightning in person, and he's trying to be helpful to you. His daughter, Natasha Irons." Oh, no, Natasha Irons, not his daughter, but you met Natasha Irons. She's one of the smartest people in the world. She's trying to help you out too. So just relax for now. And then she says, "If we can't trust the superheroes that look like us, who can we trust?" Now, Isaac and his mom are black, and when I hear that kind of language, it's usually in the context of people, looking like us. It's not like what my color of hair, or I have big ears, or I've got this color eyes, or whatever, but it's talking about some kind of like a racial, ethnic kind of thing. So if by this she means, if we can't trust the black superheroes, who can we trust? But Councilman Harriman is a black man. And so I'm trying to follow like her reasoning there, or maybe the reasoning that the writer believes that he is giving her. I don't know. It's another one of those things. Like, I am baffled by this writing choice. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. So on that level alone, I'm engaged with this in terms of what may be unintentional moral complexity for me to sort through. Still really liking the family dynamics. Always appreciate that in comics. And so I'm on board for at least the next issue of Black Lightning after reading Black Lightning #2. Then Green Lantern 18 kind of wraps up this big Civil Core storyline where the United Planets and were taken over by a Durlan shapeshifter who amassed all this power and stuff. It's been lots of space adventures, and I'm not into that as much. When things get so spacey and so cosmic and there's so many aliens involved, it starts feeling less kind of like relatable, and it certainly gets less character driven in some ways, which is, I prefer character driven stories. But there's one moment in here. Well, first off, I got to say, they're bringing the Guardians back, which I'm like, okay, great. Looks like they've changed in some way, and we don't know exactly how that is, but it's mentioned that they seem to have changed in some way. So I'm really looking forward to seeing, okay, what's the new status quo? That's what I've been waiting for this story to kind of finish out, so I can see, okay, now where is the status of the Green Lantern Corps? The Guardians are back. It looks like we've got these other colors that are like fractal parts of the spectrum or something, shades in between colors, I would assume, that are starting to show up being wielded by people all over the place. And I'm like, okay, great. Let's just blow this thing wide open. Instead of sticking to Roy G. Biv, we are going to go nuts with the potential for colors going forward. And, that'll either be a shark jumping moment or it'll be something, really cool. I mean, we'll see. But the thing that stands out to me most in this issue was Star Sapphire when she is confronting the Predator, who up to this point had been established as the avatar, the entity representing love, but in kind of like a weird way. But now Star Sapphire, Carol Ferris, which we are reminded in this issue is the last of all the Star Sapphires. She is kind of going toe-to-toe with the Predator and confronting him and believing at this point, no, something's off. This thing is not like the avatar, the ultimate, the representative, the entity of love in the universe. And so she has this confrontation with him in which she confronts Predator based on her understanding of what love truly is. She says to the Predator, if my power is about love, then let me show you how powerful that is. And in kind of like her moment of triumph where she's giving her superhero monologue of victory, she says, love is many things. It's patient and kind, but it's also righteous and powerful. It's the power that will make someone give their life for the greater good. It's not needy. It's not a parasite that only takes. It's the power that gives, and I plan on giving it to you in spades, which seems kind of weird because then she just kind of blows him away or something. I'm not sure exactly what happens. He's like, but I love you, and then he just disappears. So I don't know if she was truly loving him and that somehow made him self-destruct. The mechanics of this moment are not really explained. But what she says about love is very interesting. She says, love is many things. It's patient and kind. I don't want to read too much into this because sometimes you'll see this passage from Scripture read at weddings that the people getting married are not Christian. They just like the way it sounds, But this is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, starting in verse 4. In the ESV, it reads, love is patient and kind. She doesn't quote the rest, which goes on to say, love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. So love is the thing that more than any of those other things is going to endure. And we get some characteristics of the nature of love in that passage. Well, she goes on to say, love is many things. It's patient and kind, but it's also righteous and powerful. Now that's very interesting because the righteous aspect is something that I often, as a Christian, wish that some, usually non-Christians, but sometimes Christians as well, wish that they understood when we talk about God being love, that doesn't mean that he is not righteous. In fact, because he is loving, he exercises his righteousness because he loves people and he loves truth. So I think it's very fitting here, even though it's not in the First Corinthians passage, it is very biblical to say this of love. It's also righteous and powerful. You know, I don't know. I mean, yeah, sure. Okay, love is powerful. But what characterizes that power? She says it's the power that will make someone give their life for the greater good. I mean, little shades of the sacrifice of Jesus. That love is self-sacrificing. Really, there's a Greek word in the New Testament that is used to describe love, and it's agape, or some form of that. And this is a self-sacrificing, others prioritizing love. And that it certainly culminates and involves in its full form feelings of compassion and affection, but it is not always those things. It's not dependent on those things. Sometimes, I mean, it includes within it the idea of tough love, where sometimes we care about someone's well-being to the point where we're going to do what is best for them that they may not be happy about in the moment. So there's just more richness and complexity to the New Testament concept of biblical love than the CW gives us. Or greeting cards, or so many other ways that we kind of talk about love. Love is love, and whatever, you know. We have this very simplified, unexamined idea of love that's been perpetuated in the popular dialogue and in entertainment. But there is so much more richness to this the highest form of love that is presented in the New Testament. It's not needy, so that I think also speaks to the idea of it not being selfish. It's others-oriented. It's not taking, it's giving. It's not a parasite that only takes, she says. It's the power that gives. All of this very in keeping with the concept of agape love. And so I've said before that I wonder if Jeremy Adams, the writer of this comic, based on the flavoring of his writing in The Flash and some of the things that he did there and elsewhere and here, I don't know if he's a Christian, but I feel like whether he knows it or not, he's at the very least been influenced by Christian thinking in his life to have some of these kinds of ideas bubbling up, some of these philosophies bubbling up in his writing. So anyway, very neat to see that happening in the latest issue of Green Lantern. Well, despite all this talk of love, for my ring selection this week, I chose the orange ring of avarice or greed or hunger because, man, between what's going on with Batman, the tease at the end of Superwoman, with like this little statement here at the end of Green Lantern, and the reset of the status quo for what's going on in the world of Green Lantern, I am hungry for what is coming next in DC Comics. Yeah, this was a really enjoyable week. Looking forward to what comes next. I would love, as always, to get your thoughts on these comics or anything else that I've talked about. I also invite you to check out christiangeekcentral.com. Tons of content there you can check out made for you as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.